The Wild West, a presentation on the Transcontinental Railroad and Indians by Caitlin Palasinski. The Great Railroad Race. In 1848, gold was discovered in California. A transcontinental railroad was built to get to it. A transcontinental railroad is a railroad that would connect the East Coast to the West Coast. A railroad would make travel the shortest and cheapest at the time, compared to travel by wagon or stagecoach. Congress asked the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Company to build it. Congress gave them land and money to do this. So they started from different points, and people didn't know where they would end up. The Transcontinental Railroad. This is a map of the Union Pacific Railroad and the Central Pacific Railroad. As you can see, the Central Pacific Railroad started in Sacramento, California, while the Union Pacific started in Omaha, Nebraska. Both railroads met in Promontory Point, Utah. The Union Pacific Railroad. The head of the company was the Union General Grenville Dodge. The workers were mostly former soldiers, African Americans, and Irish and German immigrants. The workers lived in a separate train that followed them on the track they just built. The Central Pacific Railroad. Charles Crocker was the head of the company. The company hired mostly Chinese immigrants after many left when they reached Nevada. The Chinese workers were mistreated, though, because others were prejudiced against them. Prejudice is when an unfair, negative opinion about a group because of their race or religion. How train tracks were made. Railroads were made using picks to dig up the ground and make it smooth. They used shovels and wheelbarrows to haul the dirt away. Ties, which are square logs, were put across the ground, and iron rails were then placed on the ties and secured with long nails called spikes. The wetting of the rails. The Union Pacific and the Central Pacific Railroads met at Promontory Point, Utah on May 10, 1869. A telegraph was used to record when the last spike was driven into the ground. It was celebrated all across the U.S. The railroad joining ceremony didn't go smoothly, though. When Leland Stanford, the head of the Central Pacific Company, went to hit the last golden spike, he missed. This didn't stop the telegraph operator sending a message that said that the railroad was done. Instead, he celebrated with guns firing when the railroad wasn't finished. Conflicts with the Indians. The Native Americans were the first people to settle the plains in the West. Their way of life depended on buffalo. They used all parts of the buffalo for necessities such as clothing and food. The railroad brought many people, such as farmers, miners looking for gold, railroad workers, and ranchers. The Indians attacked railroad workers to stop people from moving west. This resulted in a fight with the Union Pacific Railroad. The government tried to stop the fight. They did this by sending the Indians to reservations. The Plains Indians didn't like life on the reservations because they wanted to roam the plains to hunt the buffalo. They wanted to continue with their traditional way of life. The uses for buffalo. This is a diagram showing the ways that Indians used the different parts of the buffalo. They weren't wasteful. They used things that we consider useless today, like the hooves for glue and the tendons, which are tissue, for things such as thread and strings for the bow. The disappearing buffalo. Buffalo were killed to force Indians to the reservations. This approach worked and affected the Indians negatively. They had to depend on the government to stay alive for things such as food. The food they did receive spoiled, or they didn't receive any at all because it was sold to the pioneers. The Indians rebelled against this cruel treatment by attacking pioneers and leaving reservations to find food. The Battle of Little Bighorn. This occurred in 1876. It is also known as Custer's Last Stand. The battle took place between the United States Army and the Sioux Indians. It occurred because gold was found in the Black Hills on Sioux land. The government wanted the Indians to leave their land so they could get to the gold. The Sioux refused and planned to fight. The government sent troops to capture them and were surprised when the Sioux fought back. Chief Sitting Bull and Chief Crazy Horse led the Indians. The armed forces were led by George Custer. The government's plan was for Custer to find the Sioux and have the army wait for reinforcements. General Custer was greedy for glory and attract the Indians. This resulted in Custer and his men dying. This battle is considered the Sioux' last victory because just 3 years later the Sioux were either on reservations or they escaped to Canada. The faces of the battle. The picture on the far left is General George Custer. The man wanted glory so much that he killed innocent people. The image in the middle is Chief Sitting Bull, and the picture on the right is Chief Crazy Horse. The Nez Perce's Long March. The Nez Perce lived where the states of Oregon, Washington, and Idaho meet. The government wanted the Indians to move to a reservation to make room for pioneers. The young Indians in the Nez Perce rebelled by killing some pioneers. The Nez Perce had to escape to Canada. They fought 13 battles. In the end, they were captured. After they had walked a 1,500-mile journey, they were captured 40 miles from the Canadian border. Final words. The railroad caused huge changes in travel by connecting the east and west coast so you could travel the distance in a short amount of time. It also caused conflict with the Indians by forcing them off their land onto reservations and killing buffalo, and the railroad caused changes in everyday life by connecting the coasts, changing the Indians' whole culture with the destruction of the buffalo and forcing them off their land. We're excited. All the information in this PowerPoint came from the book United States and Its Neighbors by Banks et al.